Welcome to Nurse to Health, where we bring you behind the scenes and to the front lines of healthcare. Brought to you from the beautiful campus of Hofstra University in conjunction with the Hofstra Northwell School of Nursing and Physician Assistant Studies, and with the ever-present support of John Mullen here in studio with me, radio station manager and studio engineer. For today's episode, we are thrilled, personally very thrilled, to welcome by phone from Brooklyn a very special guest, film director Petra Volpe, here to discuss her critically acclaimed Academy Award shortlisted film Late Shift. Welcome, Petra.
Thank you very much. Very honored.
Yeah, well, we are as well. With this podcast, with Nurse to Health, we generally focus on the challenges facing healthcare workers. That would be nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants especially, and their patients locally in New York, where we are, and as well more broadly, regionally, and across the United States. What's somewhat special about this episode is that we're going to underscore just how universal the challenges are, how universal the themes are. Challenges that are impacting healthcare professionals, nurses, as well as you out there in the listening audience, the patients, really just wherever you are in every corner of the globe. Thanks again, Petra Volpe, for joining us. And congratulations on the great success of this very needed and impactful film. How are you doing? How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very excited for the release in the United States of the movie. It's been played all over Europe, in all the countries there, and also in some parts of Asia. And now finally we will have the movie in theaters in the United States, which is very exciting. Also because I know that a lot of the United States struggles with the same issues as in other countries. The conditions the nurses work under, the understaffing and all of that. And we've just had the big nurses strike in New York. So I think it's a very timely topic in the movie.
Yeah, 100%. And we're going to dive, deeply into the film, I think, before we even get to that. So correct me if I'm wrong, it's been about a year or so, just about a year since the film had its world premiere. And that was at the Berlin International Film Festival. Is that right?
Yeah, it was exactly a year ago. And we had a fantastic premiere with also a lot of nurses showing up. And then the movie went on to play in Switzerland and Germany first. And it's been an incredible journey since then. And the nurses in Europe have really embraced the movie because, we tried to show the work, how it really is, and put the nurses' work at the center of the narrative for once, and not the doctor's work, which is very often in how in media nursing is portrayed as something that happens in the background, and very seldomly it's at the very center of the narrative. And I think a lot of nurses in Europe and the nurses who've seen the film appreciated to be seen, to feel seen and to feel that this movie really is a love letter to them and to the work they're doing.
Yeah, well, I had mentioned to you, I had seen excerpts of the film, outtakes, and I'd read about it, but I hadn't actually seen it. I really connected with this film. And some of it is relative to what you just said. The focus in movies, on TV is, the doctors get center stage. I'm a medical doctor. I get it. I guess, in terms of ego, we like that. But this film really, in so many ways, is a love letter to nursing. And, specifically floor nursing. Nursing is a broad profession. There's a lot of moving parts to it. But the everyday work, physical, mental, emotional, you bring out every aspect of this in a very real way. And, no doubt that was the intention, and you succeeded.
Yeah, that was really, our aim was if we make a movie where the nurses' work takes center stage, you really have to nail it and show the complexity of what nurses do today. You know, people think they put up some IVs in the background and maybe fall in love with the doctor. That's for years how they've been portrayed, as assistants somewhere in the background, they're important. We take them for granted, but the mental and physical athleticism of this work, the complexity of the knowledge they need on a technical, medical, pharmacological niveau, but then also on a human level. Like all these things that come together, you don't really see that portrayed. And we thought if we make a movie about nurses, we have to show the full spectrum of it and really honor that and celebrate the amazingness of this profession. And the predominantly women do this work. That's also, of course, the reason why it's not glamorized and why you don't see it represented, because it's a predominantly female work still. In Europe, at least, it's 80% of women who do this work. And for that reason, also, it's underestimated and undervalued. There's clearly an aspect of sexism in that also.
Yeah, no doubt. It's interesting because on this podcast, we've focused on that aspect of things. I mean, at least in the U.S., and thankfully that's changing. In fact, my co-host, Karim Nagdala, who happens not to be here today, but he's a male nurse, a cardiology nurse practitioner. So we make, certainly at our school, at Hofstra School of Nursing and Physician Assistant Studies, we place a great premium on, both genders being involved. We have a men in nursing club and stuff. And I think the reason that that's changing is maybe gets to this conversation that people maybe too late in the game, but better late than never. People are realizing that there is a lot more to it. It's not just changing bedpans and starting IVs and drawing blood. There's so many aspects to it. In fact, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's each profession, each job has its own uniqueness, but there's something incredibly unique and demanding about nursing. I spent my career as a surgeon. That's very unique, but there's certain demands that are placed on nurses that are unlike any others. So let me ask you, I mean, you're not a nurse, you're not in healthcare. How did this all come about? How did you get attracted to all of this?
I mean, my parents both worked in the hospital, but not as nurses or doctors. My father worked in sanitation, and he took his job very seriously because, hygiene and all that is very important. Where all the trash goes in the hospital is a highly important work. So he worked basically in the underbelly of the hospital. And my mother was a secretary. She would type doctors' reports. And I had worked in the hospital, as a secretary, also typing doctors' reports. And I had also worked in a lung and geriatric clinic for a few weeks as a nurse, kind of helping nurses as a student job. So I was always kind of in touch with this world, but always from kind of not the top down, but from the underbelly of the healthcare world. And then I lived with a nurse for 10 years, and I just always felt, she comes home after a shift and she has had this most existential encounters. She would be in touch with illness and death and, fear and all the big existential topics that people have to deal with. And this was just her daily life. She did that every day. And it just felt like everything I did during the day felt very banal and kind of, small compared to what she did. And it just made me think a lot about how we take it for granted that people show up for this work every day and have these really deep and also emotional, connections to their patients. Even as a professional, it doesn't mean you don't feel anything. Even a highly professional nurse has feelings and will connect to patients and their stories. And at the same time, she needs to be, the very, very cool-minded and professional. So the level of engagement I was just in awe with that. And then COVID came and I was in New York, and it was just a devastating time here in Brooklyn. Also, the hospital's very close. We saw these, cooling cars where the bodies were stacked, and we were clapping on the balconies for the nurses, and it was just obvious how much trauma also would happen for the people who were helping the people with COVID. And there was a lot of awareness in society around nurses. Everybody was very appreciative and celebrating them, and we had these term in Germany was like, they're relevant for the system, they are those ones are really still relevant. And then COVID was over and we kind of forgot again, and I know I started to do some research and, started to observe that in media, there's a lot of talk about nursing shortage in Switzerland, but also in America, in Germany, like all the countries where I lived or worked, there were quite extreme numbers, and I was like, so this is such a huge societal issue, because we're all potential patients. Everybody needs a nurse someday or another. The nurses are trying to better their work conditions and nobody's listening. And it just started to infuriate me or just also make me curious, like, why is that? And so I was trying to find a way to tell a story about that and then couldn't quite find the form. And then I read a book by a German nurse, Madeleine Calvelage, who, just very simply describes one shift and just really step by step what she does when she arrives and what happens next. I was reading this book and it just felt like reading a thriller. And I thought, this is a movie. It's just basically keeping it really simple and show one shift, one nurse, and it will encapsulate everything that's wrong with the conditions nurses have to work under. Or it will show a lot of aspects of the problematics they're dealing with. From there on, when I decided to tell the story just from one nurse and one shift, I made a very, very large research. I talked to dozens and dozens of nurses in Switzerland, Germany, also a nurse in America. I had a very long interview with her. And I started to go to the hospital and shadow the nurses and then little by little build the screenplay. So Madeleine's book gave me the idea for the form, but the way the shift unfolds and Floria as a character and all the patients, it's all fictional and it's inspired by my extensive research in all these various fields that I did.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's great. There's so much to dive into that, and we're going to. So you mentioned that the film largely follows the work shift of one particular nurse, Floria, played by Leonie. Is it Benesh or Benesh?
Benesh, yeah.
Benesh, who was just really incredible. We'll circle back to her. But the supporting cast, everybody was great. I mean, everything about it, from the cinematography to the script and acting. I mean, but she was exceptional. But you mentioned the COVID pandemic. Sometimes, as in this case, it takes a crisis to, sort of for people to focus on particular issues. And as you mentioned, that sort of was true. With COVID, bringing out a focus on nurses as heroes.
Yeah, but then they forgot very quickly. That was the sad thing.
But you're not letting us forget, see, and we're not going to forget. That's the strength of your film. No, really, I mean, you're right. People have short memories, so you're right. And certainly, your focus on the nursing shortage. You mentioned the recent strike here in New York. So, yeah, I mean, the issue does not go away. It's still very real. It's arguably only going to get worse. Nobody's really addressed it's a nursing shortage issue. It even goes beyond nursing. There's just a general shortage in terms of staff. So that's for sure. The idea that nurses were overwhelmed, anybody listening out there, I think this broadcast is for everybody. We especially aim at a listening audience for healthcare professionals, but it's aimed at just the general public. I think anybody out there listening, I think whether they're healthcare professionals or the general public, is going to find great meaning in this film. So, you mentioned your experience being awed by nurses in nursing. I've been in healthcare literally my whole life. I mean, my dad was a doctor. We lived in an apartment. His office was basically part of the apartment. As a little kid, I would go to nursing homes and hospitals. I have to tell you, quite honestly, I was awed by the film and by Floria, by the nurse in the film. And it's not new to me. But, sometimes it takes your attention being focused to really stop and think about what's going on.
Yeah, I think you say something interesting, because I think, sometimes we feel we know something, right? We know a lot of things. But I think the movie, we try to make a movie that's an experience, like a physical experience, because what I observed when I went to the hospital and shadowed the nurses is like what an immensely physical job it is. And how also physics, the sheer simple physics of one person cannot be in two places at the same time.
Yeah.
The drama of that
Yes.
it could mean on a ward where you have to do triage all the time. You have to constantly decide if there's a shortage on a ward, you constantly have to decide, do I go in this room first or in this? And this, in a hard shift, this can mean life and death, or bad outcome for somebody because you miss something, because you're not there long enough, you don't observe, you make a small mistake, or you miss the discolory of the skin, or, so they constantly are in this situation, and it's very, very physical. So we really wanted to make a movie that makes people feel what it feels like to do this job, and not just know in their head, but like I wanted people's heart rate to go up, and I wanted their blood pressure to go up, and just really experience what it means to work an understaffed shift, like what that means for the nurse, but also for the patient, because the people who pay a price for understaffing is very much the patients and then the nurses. They're both equally victims of a system that puts profit and greed over patients. For us, it was really making something that's very abstract for people quite often, make it very concrete. So that was our goal with the movie.
And look, and you achieved that goal. You very much bring all of that out. And listen, there are certain shows, movies, whatever, that dramatize because they need to. I mean, that's part of what they want. It's fictionalized. There's a storyline. That's their goal. They want to dramatize and sensationalize. You achieve honesty without having to do that. You don't need to dramatize. You kind of tell it like it is. Everything from her mannerisms to her facial expressions, her skill sets in terms of doing what she's doing, she nails it. And the interactions are just very real. You capture all of that you mentioned, that frenetic pace, the physicality, the constant, really never-ending decision-making. From large decision-making to small, but it really all ends up being large. For somebody, I won't give away too much about the film, but for somebody, let's say, waiting, for tea, okay? That becomes a big deal for somebody. Obviously, somebody waiting for painkillers, that becomes a very big deal. Now, somebody who's waiting to be transported to surgery, needs glucose infusion because their blood sugar is running low. Maybe that's arguably more important, but they're all important. And she, as with most nursing and healthcare staff, are trying to do their best, but sometimes they're faced with impossible tasks. Like you said, just the nature of reality and physics is such that you can't be in two places at one time. You can multitask, but there's a limit to it.
There's the physical limit to it. And something that really kept resonating with me is like Susan Sontag said, that when you become sick, you become citizen of another country. And what you described, like for every patient, it's usually an extraordinary situation to be in a hospital. It's a dramatic situation. It's sometimes a life-altering situation. Many people have a life that was before this stay at the hospital, and that life is over after the hospital. It's not always that dramatic, but it's an exceptional situation. And for the nurses, it's their job, right? It's their everyday life. But they need the sensibility to understand, and they have to constantly treat every patient like this. They need to have an understanding for the uniqueness of their situation and the sensibility for it. And that is an achievement, It's not something, it's work. To bring that to the table, to bring that to every patient, to go into every room, and there's two people, then there's two worlds. You have to encounter two worlds two people who might need very different things. One needs humor, the other one needs a warm hand or a song or whatever. But you have to tune in within seconds. You have to understand, what does this person need? And we all know now, it's just, you can read a ton of science on it, how important that interaction is for healing. That interpersonal connection, that moment of kindness, that moment of empathy, how extremely important that is for the outcome for patients. It's not just that the wound has been sewed closed and that they're getting the right medicine. We know now today that the way people, how they believe in the person taking care of them, and if they trust that person to do the right thing, that this is equally important as the right medicine for patient outcome. And that's one aspect of the job, to know how to handle the patient and what they need and to give it to them and to, be their companion in this lonely moment. Because as Susan Sontag said, you're really cut off from the world, and it's a very lonely place when you're sick. And I think a nurse is maybe the one person who's really there alongside you and can give you some kind of hope or solace or kindness.
Yeah, look, 100%. Listen, I mentioned before I'm a surgeon, and, we have our own important role for sure, but it's very different. And you bring that out. There's a scene in there between Floria and one of the surgeons that really brings that out, brings out the different roles, and I'm not going to go into detail on that, but very much gets to what you're talking about. There's so much to what you're saying in the film. You mentioned, these different levels of communication that a nurse has to have with the patients. It's not just the skill set in terms of administering drugs and starting IVs. There's this human aspect that's very needed, and they're the ones there, and then again, and this comes out in the film as well, there's not much room for error, right?
Yeah.
Right? And again, we could, I'm not trying to, this is not a competition with other jobs and professions, but it's a job unlike any other. There's, not every decision's life and death, but a lot of them are. And you have to constantly be on. And then, there's the other aspects in terms of, we're talking about the patients themselves. Patients are concerned, like you said, there's a certain lonely quality to being a patient. And, I've been there for sure. And I've seen it with my patients. Patients worried not only about themselves, but their pets. They're worried about their family members. The family members, obviously, the nurses are interacting with them as well in a very real way. And again, there's a whole scene in the film that very specifically deals with that whole aspect. So
I guess also patients are, of course, not at their best behavior also, right. Because I think this kind of fear and loneliness also makes us not the nicest people. So they have to deal with that also.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, people. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we definitely, you could make a film about a doctor, and there's more films about doctors. So the film really doesn't show the hierarchy in a hospital. We didn't want to focus on that. It was really, we also very consciously chose an afternoon shift where the rounds are usually, at least in Switzerland, I guess here it's the same. They're done in the morning. The doctors are more present on the ward. In the afternoon, it gets more quiet, and it's more the nurses. And because we really wanted to focus on her work and just show that really the person who is closest to the patient is the nurse in the end. Even the doctor diagnoses, he treats, but he comes in the morning, or he or she, and he comes in the evening maybe, or sometimes even not. The nurses are constantly monitoring what's going on with the patient, So that's also something people kind of don't know. And we got a lot of reactions, from audience members who were not nurses, who really said, I had no idea what a nurse actually does. And they thought, when she leaves my room, I didn't know, somehow they didn't assume that there's a million other patients she has to take care of. Yeah. I don't know what they think, that they go to the coffee room and drink coffee until he rings the bell again. I don't know. I think a lot of people who saw the movie who are not nurses were really blown away. And A lot of people said, like, I'm promising I'm going to be a better patient the next time I'm going to the hospital. And I think if the movie achieved that, at least, to make people better and more patients, then we've also achieved a lot.
Well, look, I'm repeating myself, but I'm doing it purposefully. I think you have achieved a lot, and it is a film for everybody to see, because I think a lot of people in and out of healthcare probably will learn something, that they don't know.
We very purposely didn't show the most dramatic shift, like, of course, the shift is quite tense, but it's by far not the most dramatic that I even in my short, appearance in the hospital, I've experienced shifts that were way more stressful, and then I experienced shifts that were less stressful. So what we're showing is a pretty average, maybe a little, it's pretty average. And a lot of nurses gave us that feedback. Like, people who weren't nurses said to us, it can't be so stressful, otherwise nobody would do this job. And then the nurses in the audience would say, but this is my everyday life, literally. This is not an exaggeration. And that was also important, what you mentioned before. What you said, what you appreciated is that the film is not over-dramatizing. And even not over-dramatized, it's still a thriller, to work a shift like that.
Look, 100%. And that's kind of sort of what I was getting at, even about the nursing shortage, which is an important topic and it's getting worse. Yeah, I mean, it's going to get worse. It's already challenging enough. And I just want to go back to one point just to underscore. I don't want, anybody to misunderstand. There's not a competition. This is not, hey, listen, nurses versus doctors and who's doing more and whatever. When we teach, which is what I do, I teach undergraduate and graduate nurses, and I've taught at the medical school as well, and we have another school here for health professions. What we underscore is the collaborative nature. It really does take a village. It takes a team. So this film is not to say, hey, wow, hey, look at us, we're better. It's not about that at all. It's just, this is an underrepresented field, and people really don't fully understand the full scope and depth of what nurses do. And in fact, I want to make one point sort of to play off of that. You mentioned the book, Madeline Calvage's book, that you drew on, at least somewhat, for this film. And then I actually just sort of want to draw on the original title of this film. It wasn't called Late Shift originally, was it?
No, in German it's called Heroine,
right.
So female hero, yeah.
So that's kind of what I wanted to get to. I wanted to get to sort of the source of this and the original title, which points at the heroic nature of nursing. So, I mean, just playing off of what we've been talking about, is that how you view nurses, as heroic figures?
Yes. I mean, I chose this title in German quite consciously and also a bit provocatively. I know that in the nursing community, at least in Germany, there is some resistance. Nurses say, we don't want to be called hero. We just want to have better payment and better nurse-to-patient ratio rulings. But from my perspective, and my perspective is the perspective of a potential patient, what nurses are doing is everyday heroism. And I really wanted to claim that term for nurses because usually it's used in context with soldiers, with war. It's a very masculine term, but I really think there's so much everyday heroism. I want to see more of that on the big screen, and I want to see more of these everyday heroes getting celebrated. So I'm much more interested in them than superheroes, So I liked to call the film Heroine, and it was just for English. We decided not to use it because it's not unambiguous. When I say I made a film called Heroine, I will always have to explain and say it's not the drug, but it's female hero. And that's usually not so great if you have to explain the title. So we decided we would give the English title, would be more sober and more unambiguous.
So let's stick with that idea for a second, the idea of heroes and heroines and heroism. So, the typical portrayal of a hero, of Superman, he changes from Clark Kent into Superman. He changes his, puts on his uniform and cape and whatnot. The film starts, and actually just you mentioned before sort of the world that Floria enters. It's a very unique world embodied by all the different elements we've been talking about. So the film starts with her arriving at the hospital, and she comes into the locker room. And she undergoes this transition. She doesn't put on a cape, but, she puts, we'll talk about that a little bit. The transition from her world as just, a non-nurse, a non-healthcare professional, and she has her own, family life and her own personal issues. And then she really undergoes this physical and otherworldly transition into this other world.
Yeah, I think everybody who wears a uniform puts a boundary between your everyday self and the self you become when you are the professional. And I think in context with nursing, I really think it's a heroic cape they put on, because they step into caring, like their profession is to care for other people. And I think a lot of people, for example, think that when a professional nurse works, she puts her feelings also, like her coat, she puts them in the cupboard, right, and leaves them in the wardrobe. But that was not my experience. I think is such a complex thing to navigate, because in order to be empathetic, and really caring, you need a kernel of yourself, your true self. But at the same time, you need to protect yourself. You can't have a meltdown every time. You can't break down in front of patients, but you can also not become unfeeling. So to navigate that thin line, of being empathetic and really there, and at the same time being professional, that for me is such a cognitive endeavor and achievement that nurses do every day. So that was something I observed. I also found it so interesting as an outsider, right, to see how nurses talk with their patients and how they talk amongst each other, which has a very different tone. And that was something we worked on very, very much. Leonie, the actress, like when she also went to the hospital to observe the nurses, and all these details were really important for us. Like, how do they move when they work? How do they move in the cafeteria? Like, how does she talk with the patients? How does she talk with her colleagues? So to really nail this transition, because I observed that nurses do use a different tone. And it is a more professional tone, but at the same time, it also still needs to be authentic. So it's such an interesting, thin line they walk, of being a real mensch, but also protecting themselves and be professional. That alone is such an interesting thing to just look at and observe.
Yeah,
Sorry, my dog is barking.
Oh, that's right. Hey, listen, he's excited about this podcast. That's fun.
Yes.
But listen, absolutely, you nail it. The film nails it. Leonie Benish nails it. I mean, she's incredibly real and credible, and does not overplay it. Part of her being real is she has her moments, right? She has her moments in the film, and that's very real. She is dedicated and sincere. Literally, we talked about the transition. I mean, she quite literally hits the ground running, after she makes her transition in the locker room, puts on her sneakers and her, blue scrub outfit. She literally hits the ground running and doesn't stop. There's not much time for break. She takes a short break to make a personal phone call, but otherwise she is on the move. And again, this is real.
Yeah, also the thing that a lot of nurses will tell you, they don't drink, so they don't have to go to the bathroom. The fact that they don't drink and eat, that's not an invention of the movie. It's something we observe. And very often, you help, like her shift starts, that she helps her colleague. And that already puts her in delay for a few minutes with her own shift, and the chain reaction of how everything, like every little thing that goes wrong, like a nurse student forgets to fill up something, so she has to run back to the pharmacy. All those little things in a job like that can create a delay, and that delay can put you into a world of trouble and also put all the patients in a world of trouble. So we wanted to show that pressure, what it means to work under that pressure. And that's so common and every day.
Listen, this has been great. I really have tons more questions and we could go on. We just don't have the time. I just want to make sure.
Well, if people like it, we can make part 2.
You know what? 100%. I'd be perfectly happy. Right now we have you, in Brooklyn. You make your way back from Europe to Brooklyn. Right now you're in Brooklyn, but we'd love to get you into the studio. So sure, we can revisit that, no doubt. I just want to make sure before we end to remind people that this film is having its American debut March 20th, which, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to have its premiere in Manhattan at Film Forum, I believe. Is that correct?
No, it's at the Quad.
At the Quad, all right. I take it back. At the Quad Theater. Yeah, so look out for that. I think it's a film that, I think without any sort of exaggeration at all, should be seen by just about anybody, because the audience is everybody, in the sense that, if you haven't been a patient, unfortunately, all of us are at some point going to be patients in some way, or if we're not, we have friends or family who are. I mean, this is just part of the human experience. This is very real. Not everybody, we don't all experience every aspect of life, but, unfortunately, human frailty is what it is, and we're all exposed to illness and trauma and disease. So,
yeah, I wanted to say that, the film really also shows the beauty of the work. That's really important. It shows the hardship, but it also shows the value this work brings to humanity, and really celebrates that, and, our deep love and respect for this profession. So I hope the audience will take away that. And also all the nurses I talked to, they all said, without exception, they all said they would choose this profession over and over again. It's the most beautiful work in the world. The only thing that they struggle with is the conditions. But the work itself is still something that gives people so much meaning and purpose and a purposeful life, and that in our times means so much, and I hope that the film also celebrates that.
Well, amen to all of that. And with that, again, thank you for this really insightful film and moving conversation. I think there's a lot more to talk about, which is why people should see the film, because I'm sure if you go to see the film with friends, you'll have a lot to talk about afterwards. It's a necessary film and a very unique film in lots of ways. So thank you
so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. So with that, this has been another episode of Nurse to Health. This has been brought to you in collaboration with the Hofstra Northwell School of Nursing and Physician Assistant Studies, and with the always present support of John Mullen, our studio manager. I am Robert Gluck, Dr. Bob Gluck. Away today is my wonderful co-host Karim Nagdala, but he will join us on the next episode. And with that, thank you and stay well.